Hello and welcome. I'm Pastor Bobby, lead pastor of Community Fellowship Church here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's our hope that this talk is going to be an encouragement for you on your spiritual journey. We do believe that you can have a spiritual connection with God, a personal connection, and that Jesus is your link to that. It's actually our goal for people at CFC to become committed followers of Christ, and we think these online talks are a great resource for you, but not a replacement for being part of a local community, a church. And so we want to encourage you to be plugged into a church somewhere where you are. But if you're ever in Lancaster, we'd love for you to come and visit us in person at some point. And you're welcome to check out more on our church at our website, communityfellowship.com. Hopefully this talk can be inspiring for you. We hope that you can enjoy it today.
All right. Good morning, CFC. It's an honor to be here in front of you, sharing what God has put on my heart in continuation of our mini-series in Proverbs. My name is elicit, as Mike said. Big shout out to FCA, amazing organization. God is doing great things through the vehicle of sports in our community and internationally. So if I haven't met you yet, my wife Amanda and I have been a part of CFC for over 13 years. We have 5 children here that are serving alongside of us, learning, growing in their faith. I was a former elder here, had an honor of serving for 6 years. Just an amazing group of leaders that I've been a part of, was able to learn and grow alongside of. And it's an honor to deliver this morning's message as Bobby is continuing and finishing out his first part of his sabbatical. And last night I said we continue to pray for Bobby and his rest. And this morning he showed up. He's here somewhere. And so this morning I said we thank God that Bobby's back. And we are grateful that he was able to get refreshed, renewed, and he's back doing church like we all are. And so it's great that the church was able to bless him in that way and for his continued service. And so this morning, as I mentioned, we're going to continue with the study of Proverbs, and our theme for this mini-series has come from Proverbs 3:13, verse 14. Which says, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold." So what Proverbs is saying, get wisdom, get understanding. And it's a book, as Chris had mentioned when he started. If you look at the calendar and you say, okay, it's the 25th, you can open up the book of Proverbs and you got a whole chapter of Proverbs for you that will cover probably 5 or 10 topics, and one of them will jump out. And it's an incredible wealth of godly wisdom. Not an easy book because it's not topical. It jumps around. But God has used the book of Proverbs in so many people's lives to orient them back to godly living. And it has been a part of my journey. And so as we look at Proverbs, one of the questions is, why spend another week in Proverbs? And really, this is part of why the whiteboard's here. One of the reasons is there's been an age-old thirst and hunger to understand these 3 domains. These domains are self, others, and God. We call this God. The world calls this greater power, universe, what have you. But ultimately, there are 3 domains that we have, for millennia, have been hungering for deeper understanding. We all want to know more about what makes us tick. We don't fully comprehend ourselves, and we want deeper knowledge and insight into what makes us us. We certainly don't understand our neighbor as well as we should. We certainly don't understand our boss or our coworker or our friend as much as we think we should. We thought we knew him, and then something happens, right? That domain of others is deep. And then certainly the realm of God, the desire to know our Creator more. It's deep. These voids are there from birth. And so Proverbs is a place where you can turn to get some of the practical wisdom and understanding in how to do life from a physical perspective, from a material perspective, from a relational perspective. The complexity that I depict there is very complex. And Proverbs is just a great place to go because it will speak into those domains, and sometimes in ways that you just need for the day, by opening up Proverbs. And so that's the why we're continuing with Proverbs. The other reason we're going through Proverbs is you can isolate the topics. If you've been coming to CFC, we believe in God that loves you, that has a plan for you. But when Bobby preaches, he doesn't usually preach topically. like we're doing here through Proverbs, he usually goes through a book of the Bible, not to infer what the, passages that speak to a certain topic, but rather, what is that book of the Bible saying in its original context, and then what is it saying for us today? So it is a bit of a different shift for us. We are looking at a very topical way of, as far as the message is concerned this weekend. And so these three domains, from a perspective of how it's spoken of today, there's a lot that's been written on awareness, self-awareness, also known as emotional intelligence. And so one of my favorite concepts on this has been written by Daniel Goldman. He's kind of the granddaddy of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence basically says you don't necessarily need to be the smartest person in the room to be the most successful. As a matter of fact, sometimes the smartest people in the room sometimes are the most foolish. They don't take feedback. They don't learn. They have high IQ but low EQ. And so what is this EQ all about? And so a lot of common business literature speaks of emotional intelligence as a pretty hot topic. I train on it in a professional setting quite a bit. And so the triad of awareness that Goldman speaks of is self-awareness, others awareness, and world. He calls it world awareness. And so the research has proven that these three awarenesses have to exist in you for you to achieve your goals and for you to flourish as an individual and for teams to flourish. And so the reason for that is if you don't have self-awareness, Goldman says you are rudderless. You're like a ship out at sea without any direction if you don't have self-awareness. If you don't have others' awareness, you are heartless. And if you don't have world awareness, well, you're clueless. And so we don't want to be that. And so all that to say is there's a good reason for us to dig into the Word of God, into Proverbs, so we can gain a greater awareness. And so if we do a quick recap of the topics that we covered, first week, Chris Rich talked about outrage. It was a great message, spoke to me deeply, loved the vulnerability, about the fact that we all get triggered. We all get triggered because we have certain standards and expectations. But what really spoke to me there was the idea that sometimes we get triggered and we join the mob. And the illustration from the gospel where the woman that was caught in adultery was brought to Jesus, and the Pharisee said, what should we do? And Jesus didn't join the mob. Jesus approached the situation at a personal level, at an individual level, and he transformed the situation. And so the challenge there was, be careful about joining mobs. Be very, very, pursue understanding what God has for you in the moment with the issue, with the individual. Because it's easy to join the mob and be anonymous, but it takes real diligence and thoughtfulness to join individuals. We also heard from Eric about words that kill, that leave a mark. They're like a sword, words that can affirm and give life. He talked about the memories that he has of some strange, fellow student telling him about his years. Well, I related to that. I had big ears growing up, and someone had mentioned that to me once, and that sticks with you. Words have power from the very, very, very early on. And so the idea of having words that truly bring life and having accountability for those words is a powerful message. And then last week, Matt spoke about discernment. And Romans 12 about being a living sacrifice. But it was a powerful message, but the part that really stuck with me was this idea that he shared through the illustration where a priest, I think it was a priest that asked Mother Teresa for a prayer, and she said, "What would you like me to pray for?" And he said, "Clarity." And she said, "No, I will not pray for clarity. I will pray for trust." And he says, how can you not pray for clarity? You're a woman that clearly has been clear about your calling. And she said, "No, I have not been all that clear. I've been trusting God day by day." And the verse that Matt brought, it was just powerful. I've been ruminating on it, is the psalm that says, "Be a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." This concept of sometimes it's not a high beam, megawatt light that just gives us clarity where we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But God is with us step by step. And so that discernment, be encouraged by that. I was encouraged by that. And so this week we come to the topic of friendship. And so I come to this topic not as a professional psychologist, not as a professional, behavioralist. I come to you as a fellow member of CFC that has studied this topic personally, have been impacted by it. But I also recognize that it can touch on some areas that may hurt. It may touch on some areas that will bring you life and excitement and be like, oh, the goodness of friendship and the sweetness of friendship, that I get it. But it's a spectrum, and I fully recognize that. I just challenge you as we dive into this word. I'm using Proverbs to walk through it, but ultimately, I'm going to point to Christ. And so, to me, I'm just going to tell you, we're going to talk about the risks of not having friends. We're going to talk about the benefits of having friends. And we're going to talk about a few implications of how to get there. And so, but before we dive into that, I was thinking about an illustration to kind of start this off with. And the one that came to mind was when I was in New Jersey. I went to college in New Jersey. A little bit of background. I was born in Ukraine, moved here when I was 7, went to high school here, then went to New Jersey. I have no idea why, different story. But it was amazing, and I know Bobby likes to pick on Jersey. Jersey's actually, has a lot more going for it than most people realize. And the people are amazing, most of them. But once again, we'll talk about that. It's who you choose to be friends with. But so I'm in my first sales job, and I'm going door to door as a sales rep, trying to sell people in UPS services, and it was dealing with rejection. It was not easy. Anyhow, I'm sitting at lunch with my boss, Joe, and Joe was this gregarious guy, Italian, Northern Jersey, and back then, sales reps at UPS wore suits to work. I'm talking summertime suits, wintertime suits. Not only suits, ties, right? This is 20 years ago, very formal. And Joe introduced me to this thing called cufflinks. It was really cool. You wore cufflinks. I mean, you got to have a special shirt that you can wear cufflinks. And so here, Joe's sitting at the diner. We're having chicken parm at Ford's Diner. The chicken parm is amazing. And all of a sudden, he shifts. He takes out his binder and he goes, Ilya? He had a thing for kind of dramatics. He goes, Ilya, I just want to make one thing clear. We have gotten to know each other. We have gotten to have fun together. But I just want you to be clear about one thing. And he draws two circles. And he says, this, Ilya, is Joe's stuff. And he didn't say stuff. He said, Ilya, this is Ilya's stuff. He said, let's be clear about one thing. I'm here for you as a boss. I'm going to give you the tools you need to be successful and earn your commission. I'm here for you. I'm not really your friend. I'm committed to your success professionally, but personally, leave your junk at home. See, what Joe was saying is, I've only got so much bandwidth, and this relationship, the terms of this relationship are going to be strictly professional. See, his father was a judge, and so he was clear about, let's establish the rules of this engagement really, really straight, up front. I never had anyone tell me that. It's like, there isn't even a chance. All right. So that's the way that relationship went. But it was a great relationship. It was very professional. He was the boss, but he was clear it wasn't going to be my buddy. And so, okay, we operated within that framework very well. But see, the idea of friendship is different than that. You actually don't even have that conversation. C.S. Lewis talks about this. You actually don't say, hey, you want to be my friend? Yeah, I want to be my friend. You just become friends. You kind of start doing things, right? And so to actually not become a friend, you actually have to tell somebody like, whoa, we're not going to do that. But we usually don't have that conversation. We just do it with our actions. So the idea of friendship, as we dive into it, is really this. The big idea is embrace friendship's power. Friendship has a ton of power for you personally. It has a ton of power for your community. You got to be available, be committed, and be trustworthy. And that T, you can replace with timely, because there are times it's just timeliness, not trustworthy. You just got to be timely. You got to act. That's the big idea of this message is embrace the friendship's power, be available, committed, and trustworthy. The thing is, this was part of God's design. When God created, he always said it was good. After every day it was good. But then when he created Adam, he said, it is not good. Adam wasn't meant to be alone, and so he created someone suitable to him. He created Eve. The idea of community was part of our design from the beginning. And so we need friendship. And so we're going to explore that further, but we're going to start with the risk. If we don't engage in friendship, if we don't invest in friendship, if we don't ourselves become available, committed, and trustworthy, and don't take that seriously, what are the risks? Well, Proverbs 18:1 has something to say about this. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. See, Proverbs was written thousands of years ago, and it was clear about this. Do not isolate. Do not isolate. You have to take a step to engage. And so, as I was preparing for this, as Bobby and I were thinking about this message, it was like, friendship in the age of loneliness. Loneliness is real. Loneliness is here, and I fully recognize it. The stats are staggering. I started digging, and wouldn't you know, May 3rd, the Surgeon General posted a report that 80 pages long, it's online, just this year, that we are living in an epidemic of loneliness. First time in America's history, such a report has been published outlining all the factors, all the forces that have driven our society to an epidemic of loneliness. The physical implications of this are very dire. The facts, I'm not going to state the stats because I'll get them wrong, but they're like over 50% morbidity rates go up for your physical ailments, cardiac arrest, and other things, and natural disasters, not having someone to call. Your likelihood of death go up in such high magnitudes if you're not connected. If you're isolated, your physical survival depends on it. And the ointment or the medicine for it is right there. And so Proverbs spoke of it. And so sometimes when we think about loneliness, we think of the elderly. The fact is, the most staggering thing, for the first time, loneliness rates in our youth have gone up higher than ever. From 16 to 30, the numbers are absolutely staggering and kind of heartbreaking. That has led to depression, has led to mental health, and so the epidemic is amongst us, and so it's all around us. And so I would just say, the other point of this is, we think of the elderly, we think of someone neglected, right? The fact is, Proverbs, when you read this, says, whoever isolates himself, it's a different tone. It's like, ooh, that sounds willful. That really sounds willful. And here's what I can tell you. I've seen people isolate themselves because of the choices that they were making in life, and they were boxing people out. That road only ends in tragedy. And so there are some that isolate themselves on purpose. I've seen it in my life. Life gets busy, you isolate yourself. And so that isolation can be a pretty wide spectrum, but what Proverbs is saying, isolating yourself is a pretty selfish thing. What's really amazing about that is, it's a deceiver. It then ultimately hurts you. And so we look to Proverbs to say, there is a real case for engaging in friendship, a real case. And so the benefits, right? So that's kind of like the doom and gloom, and it's real. But then there are really sweet benefits. If we look to Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, but a brother was born for adversity. So a friend loves at all times. And so, as I mentioned, I wasn't born here, so sometimes I use that as an excuse about my linguistic skills. And so when I used to read this verse, up until probably 5 years ago, it's kind of crazy. The way I read this was, a friend loves at all times, but a brother was born as an adversary. That's how I read it. That, in my mind, this theology was somehow like in my head, like, all right, a brother, God's design for a brother was adversary. And there's plenty of adversaries. The first two brothers, one killed the other, right? Like, there's a good reason to think that way, and there's a lot of, precedent. We all have that. We just compete with the ones that we're closest to. But having 5 brothers and 5 sisters, I always thought that was part of God's design, to be adversarial towards one another. And as I dug in, the truth is, a brother is born for adversity is when there's a hardship, the brother or sister is there, right? That's typically in a functioning family, that's what happens. And even if there's isolation between siblings, if there's something really tragic, sometimes that brings a family back together, right? Hardships bring families together. But sometimes family is on the other side of the country, and so they're not there for the little celebrations. They're not there for, to enjoy hobbies that you have or interests that you have or just to walk and talk, right? What this is saying is a friend is there for all times. When you're celebrating, when you're sad, when you're going through the peaks and valleys, a friend loves at all times. And so the importance of having a friend is just powerful. And so I was thinking a couple illustrations on this point, and the first one that came to mind is my friend Myron. Last year when Russia invaded Ukraine, it immediately kind of startled the world. And 2 friends of mine that I grew up with, both from Ukraine, started a fund. And to get resources to the front lines. And so, when a tragedy like that happens, we all want to give somehow, and we don't know how. And so here's an amazing opportunity. Their family, friends in Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, were creating a network to get supplies to families in the front lines and actually get women and children out. And so I immediately wanted to join in. I'm like, all right. I talked to them, like, I'm going to reach out to a lot of my friends personally via text for prayer, for support, and just make them aware there's an opportunity to engage. And so I did that. Myron immediately responded and said, hey, let's get together tomorrow or this week. I really want to throw a banquet, a fundraiser banquet to raise awareness for this, because this is cool. I was like, it was that simple. Like, okay, the very next day, we get together at Gracie's in Leola, and we're talking, and I'm like, Myron, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you really have a lot of stuff going on in your life. He's like, yeah, it's probably not a good time, but timing is right. Like, you got it. People want to know. People want to hear. People want to contribute. And so it really showed to me how a friend in the time of need, it was a much bigger issue, and I was just a conduit passing along a way to connect. And it just, boom, showed me what it looks like when you just act on a hunch that you need to engage. And so I've been, same gentleman, Myron, I was having coffee with him just to catch up. I had a hard time connecting with him in the last couple months. There's some things happening in my life and transitions. I was looking for some wisdom, some advice. Finally, we got together, and I'm like, man, you've been in Florida a lot. He's like, yeah, Scott, my right-hand man at work for the last, 10, 15 years, what have you, he has stage 4 cancer. Man, he's dying. He just retired a year ago, took his wife, he and his wife moved to Florida, and within a year or so, he's got cancer. He's like, whew. So I just asked him, he just started sharing, and he's like, I felt like I needed to go there. He has a sister far away, but no kids, and he and his wife's having back issues, and like I felt like I just needed to go there. And so he was there, extended his getaway there, and then he's like, just last week I purchased the ticket and I went down there. I'm like, wow. Like, I didn't even call him. I said, if I would have called him, in his story, what really stood out to me, he's like, if I would have called him, he would have talked me out of it. He's like, I just bought a ticket and went down there and we spent some time together. And so it's like, wow, Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, right? It's one of those things where when you know you have to do something, you do it. And in this story, what he said, he's like, I was this close to calling him or not going, and like I got a lot of stuff, but just felt like I needed to go. And so it's just an illustration of acting on that love towards your friend. So how do we get there? What are some of the things that we can do? Really, it talks about wisdom. How do we become wise to attract wise friends, and how do we become friends with wise so we can become wise, right? It's like a circle. And so Proverbs 13:20 says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. So whoever is wise, walks with the wise becomes wise. So how do you walk with the wise? So in preparation for this message, I dusted off virtually or via Audible, I dusted off a classic that I've had that Dave Ramsey recommended probably 15 years ago called Thou Shalt Prosper by Rabbi Lapin, Daniel Lapin. Great guy. Kind of breaks down how the world works from his perspective, from a Hebrew tradition, from a Jewish people's tradition, in so many domains. Incredibly powerful. And so one of the reasons that I dusted it off is I remembered him talking about this one tradition as it relates to friendship, and I wanted to hear it again. And so I started listening. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to listen to the whole thing. And so this is the tradition that is incredibly impactful about encouraging the wise to walk with the wise. He says Jewish men, when they travel for business, they typically go to synagogue in the morning, whether they're out traveling for business or they're at home. So when they go to synagogue, you typically will find 2 people in there for morning service that are out of town, completely out of town. So someone in LA or New York or Philadelphia going to synagogue will typically meet 2 other people from around the world there looking to engage in worship. Through that custom and through that tradition of worship and diving into the Word, they meet other people. And if you think of extrapolate that over thousands of years, the community of brotherhood that has been created, and that's what he talks about, is your little choices of getting yourself out there, going to community group, going to Bible study, going to the women's thing, whatever it is, has you cross paths with somebody else that's disciplining themselves to get up, that's disciplining themselves to take that step to get feedback and how to grow as a person. And so it's a great illustration of what it takes to walk with the wise. Me personally, I have had mentors in my life that have shown me a lot. My father passed away when I was in my early 20s, and so God has placed godly men in my life that have become mentors for a season, some for the last 20 years, all by engaging in fellowship and really the blessing of engaging in fellowship and community at church. Me personally, I have been blessed by, and it's a God thing. All I can say is my last 4 jobs have come through connections at church, friends that I've met at church. And so it's just a beautiful thing of how the body of Christ works together and rises. I've been reminded that Abraham is called a friend of God, right? Abraham is called a friend of God. Well, the other thing about Abraham is said to have had 25,000 people in his close network. Often we hear about, one friend, you can count, this is all you need. For that closeness, yes, it's hard to have 25,000 or 100 or 300. But what I'm saying is, like, Abraham made himself available. His tent had a door going to north, south, east, and west. Like, Abraham, who was a friend of God and took time to be with God, was also a friend to 25,000 people. So there's a lot of examples of what it means to put yourself out there and the work that it takes and the blessing that comes with that mutual engagement. So part of that, though, we need to have a little discernment sometimes because our paths will cross with people that the Bible calls fools. So Proverbs 18:24 says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." And of course, we know that friend is our ultimate friend, which is Jesus, and we'll get there when we land the plane. But there are friends, like in this world, that are closer to you than your sibling. They really are. But this idea of many companions may cause you to ruin is real. And so some of you have heard the saying of "tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you your future." This is where it comes from. Oftentimes we emulate. We become more and more like our 5 closest friends, right? There's a lot that's out there on that. Proverbs also talks about the wise, the foolish, and the evil. And I won't get into that. It can be its own message. But Dr. Henry Cloud has an awesome YouTube video on it. The wise, the foolish, and the evil. Amazing illustration. But ultimately, the caution for us is there are wise people out there, there are fools, and there are evil. And we need to be discerning. And, the fools are the ones that really may be the smartest people in the room, but, they're probably the college buddy. They just want to have a good old time and really not open to feedback or giving you feedback. It's about them. And so it's important to pick your friends wisely and set boundaries. The idea of setting boundaries that I learned from Joe was great. One of the things I heard from a former elder, Mike, here, as I was going through some things, he's like, redefine the terms of the relationship. Like, I remember him saying that once. I'm like, whoa, that is so profound. Let me write that down. Redefine the terms of that relationship. Like, okay, we all have agency. We all have choice in defining the terms of our relationship. Proverbs talks about not crossing the threshold of your friend too much. Otherwise, he can get tired of you. I remember my dad saying that as an excuse or a reason why I couldn't go see my buddy for the 5th time, and it was the summertime. He would proverb me, like, don't cross the threshold of your friend too much or else he'll get sick of you. I'm like, okay, another buddy. Maybe that's why I have a lot of friends. Like, Proverbs speaks to that, right? And so the terms of your relationships are really important. So we have to engage in setting those terms. So this idea of the risks of not having friends in isolation, the benefits of having friends, kind of some of the practical steps that we can take to having friends is really important. But the fact is, it's hard. I know many of us are sitting here thinking, man, so-and-so betrayed me. So-and-so let me down. So-and-so didn't send me that text. And some of it can be silly, and some of it can be really deep, right? Words that were said, expectations that weren't met. So this topic is heavy with real experience. It's like, who is this guy talking about friends and how wonderful it is and rosy? Like, no, I get it. Like, I get it. I really do. In what it means to experience betrayal, what it means to miss out or a friend not meeting your expectations and really like shining a light to really where the relationship was. But I've also felt the blessing of friendship, and I've talked about some of that. But let me just share a story recently, and it's I even struggled sharing it because it's embarrassing, but it's so real. As maybe one way of redeeming this oops in my life as a friend. So recently, my brother-in-law, who had a cabin in West Virginia, had a tragedy in that the cabin burned down. He was there, he was burning some trash, and the winds were really, really wild, and his entire cabin burned to the ground. And as he was trying to figure out what was going on, because it started in the back and the wood and the propane blew up, he was trying to figure all that out. As he was trying to figure it out, initially trying to put out a burning cabin, he got third-degree burns on his arms, on his leg. Fortunately, not his vitals or anything, but he got burned pretty bad. And so he was airlifted from West Virginia to Pittsburgh. And as this happened, the family was like in shock because most of us have been to this cabin. It's like, gone. What about Vlad? Like, what's up with him? So we all start texting, right? I'm one of 11, and so imagine all the sisters texting my sister, and all the brothers texting my sisters, and then some of the older nephews. And so the response we all get is from her oldest son, who says, "Hey, thanks for all the concern and prayer. My dad is going to be fine. He's in critical condition in Pittsburgh, but we would appreciate some privacy. Like, we're in total shock, and it's a bit overwhelming." It was wise, very wise. Like, when tragedy happens, it could be very difficult to manage. And so we're like, okay, we'll be praying for him, and we'll re-engage, a little later. And so to me, the little later was, okay, when he gets home, we'll kind of check in and call. And well, those few days turned into a few more days, and that weekend turned into another weekend, and those weekends turned into over a month of weekends. And I did not reach out to my brother-in-law or my sister other than that one text. There's a lot going on in my life that made me kind of think about it in a moment, but I didn't make myself available, right? And to show my commitment and my love for my brother-in-law, who I consider a friend. And so as that guilt, right, and that's a part of what I want to touch on as well, is we all may carry some guilt. And so this experience to me, there was a lot of guilt of, what kind of friend am I, right? What kind of, and it's like, finally I said, all right, enough is enough. Like, I gotta get this, like, I'm clearing the schedule. So I cleared the schedule for Saturday, and I said, the only way I can show my love to him that can maybe like make it right, because we all have all social norms, right? All these things are going through your head. Like, I'm gonna make him some Chinese. And so what is a Ukrainian guy, born, raised in America, cooking, Chinese, what could that look like? So not just buy Chinese, like cook Chinese. I love cooking, and so I, for the first time ever, made shrimp fried rice for him. I do take risks on my friends. They get to try out my first version. And I can tell you, that was probably my best shrimp fried rice that I've made yet. But what I can tell you, my kitchen was a mess. Shrimp fried rice in the kitchen, not a good idea. Invest in a Blackstone. So what I can tell you is when I came to Wojcik and I gave him the shrimp fried rice, right with it was like, bro, I am so sorry. Like, I didn't visit you sooner, right? Because that's not what family does, right? A lot of excuses, but man, I'm just sharing that vulnerably of how it can be where life just takes over and you don't prioritize your commitments and you're not available, right? And you're not timely with your actions. And so all of us have that, and some of us have that happen to us, right? And we're carrying that stone, the heart of stone, towards that person. And what I can tell you, the grace of my sister and my brother-in-law, like, man, we were just so grateful we're alive, that my husband's alive. My sister was just amazing. She's like, forget all that. My husband's alive. Like, this is good. Thanks for the shrimp fried rice. It was just like they moved on and they gave me grace. And so what I can tell you is, for me personally, receiving that was incredibly helpful. But ultimately, that journey, who do we look to? We don't look to the examples that I shared, or to me, or to your best friend. We ultimately look to Jesus, right? We look to him to say, okay, what has Christ done for us to show us what it looks like to be a friend? And what does friendship really look like for me? When we look at Christ, we look at someone who taught the crowds, right? Crowds followed him. What we learn about some of the things that he did was he sent out, he had the 12 disciples, we know that, right? But he had at one point sent out 72 for ministry. We also know that there was one that betrayed him, who was a close friend, and there was one that denied him. And the one that denied him, Peter, was also one of the three that were a part of his inner circle. Out of the 12, there were three a part of his inner circle. And so what it says is, like, you only have so much time. And that's reality. How you multiply that time and how you manage it is a skill. But ultimately, when we look at Christ, he had an inner circle, but he made himself available to 12, and then he invested in even more. And so when we look at the sentiment that Christ has for his disciples when he calls them friends, when we read John 15:12, it's a powerful illustration for us. This is what it says. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. You are my friends. And in the passage he says, I have shared everything that the Father has given me. Kind of illustrating the fact of, like, I've been so transparent, I've shared everything, I've given everything, I've been available. But for you, what does it mean to be a friend? So when we look at this, when we say, what does it mean for me to be a friend? Ultimately, I believe this is what it is. It's friendship with God and friendship with others. And this idea of righteous living as it relates to self. So, self, others, God. When you look at that Venn diagram, when this intersection is that sweet spot. It's the only place where people that you enjoy cycling with, having coffee with, having affinity and affiliation with, through practical things. And these practical things are important. That's how we become friends with people, practically, here. But when you bring in your faith into this equation, into your friendships, that's the only explanation where you have folks from all walks of life, from all sorts of generations and races, fellowshipping and enjoying the sweetness of brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ, right? So I just challenge us to continue to invest in our friends that can continue pointing us towards God, towards those practices, towards those disciplines that ultimately orient ourselves towards Christ, that ultimately orient ourselves towards being a friend of God, right? And so the big idea for this message is embrace friendship's power. Be available, be committed, be trustworthy. That leads to action, right? It's really about action. And so when I say be available, what does it look like for you personally to be available for somebody? Knowing that we all have limitations. But I hope there's something that I said here that nudges you, right? Nudges you to do one thing. And as we start moving towards reflection, what does that look like? Committed. What does it mean for you to be committed to your friends? How do you show them your commitment and the fact that you're there for them? Is it a text? Is it a call? Is it an email? Is it clearing your schedule? I think for me personally, it's actually looking at the schedule and saying, we're going to find something in this hectic schedule somewhere. But it may be something much smaller, like that text or the phone call. And then ultimately being timely and trustworthy. That's what I heard from my friend Myron. Just act. Sometimes we can talk ourselves out of doing the right thing because of norms and expectations, and quite frankly, being embarrassed to take some step forward towards somebody. There's these norms. There's these complexities that we wrestle with, right? But what I'm saying is just act. Step out in faith. So as we wrap this up, I'd like for you to think about who does come to mind. Is there someone that you need to make it right with? Is there someone you need to reach out with? And I don't want you leaving this morning without deciding what to do about it. Whether it's a text during the first worship set where you'll be able to reflect to that person, whether it's just after you leave here, get in the right place and make that phone call. But I personally believe we all have areas in our life where we can take a step forward to allow God into that relationship to bring restoration. So let's pray together. Dear Lord, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for the example of Christ who has shown us what it means to be a true friend. Someone that we can access as often as we need to without ever bothering him, Lord. Our friends may get tired of us. We may get tired of them, Lord, but you never tire. You actually say, come to me who are weary. Come to me. Lord, so we come to you and we ask you to give us courage to step out and restore broken relationships. We ask you to help us give us strength to manage our schedules well so we can prioritize our friends, to be available, to be available for friendship because it is part of your design in how you sanctify us, how you bring us towards you, towards better choices, towards helping our communities flourish and thrive through being activated in our friendships in a way that brings honor and glory to you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.